phone rings in the middle of the night. On the other end, a man is speaking to the front desk clerk of a small roadside motel just off US 31 in Holland, Michigan. It's late, past 2 a.m., the kind of hour where everything is quiet enough that even small sounds carry. Their conversation is normal at first, routine. Then something changes. There's a shift in her voice, subtle but immediate, a pause. And then, in a tone that doesn't match the conversation from just seconds earlier, she says something that stops him cold. "Don't take it all, sir." There's movement in the background now. Not clear, not loud, just enough to know someone else is there. Then, the line goes dead. When police arrive, they find the front office in disarray. Money missing from the register, a cigarette still burning in the ashtray. But the woman who was just on the phone is gone. What this scene suggested was simple, a robbery. What it actually was something very different. And for more than 2 decades, no one said a word. Welcome back to Dark Dialogue, the podcast where we unravel the shadows of the human mind and dive deep into the mysteries that haunt small towns and big cities alike. I'm your host, John.
And I'm your co-host, Angela, and together we'll shine a light on the stories that keep us up at night, the unsolved disappearances, lives stolen too soon, and the questions that refuse to be buried.
So tonight we're going to Holland, Michigan, January 1979. A 22-year-old college student disappears from her job at a roadside motel in the middle of the night. And within hours, the explanation is already in place. A robbery. Something quick, opportunistic, random, and on the surface, that explanation works. But when you start pulling on it, even just a little, it does not hold up. Because this case isn't just about a moment where something went wrong. It's about an environment where things are already off long before that phone ever rang.
So when you say the explanation works, you mean it made sense at the time, but it doesn't actually explain what happened.
Exactly. It checked just enough boxes to stop people from asking harder questions. And once that narrative took hold, everything else started building around it. Investigative direction, interviews, assumptions, all of it filtered through something that just wasn't true.
That's always the part that gets me, because once you start in the wrong direction, everything after that is kind of built on that mistake.
Yeah, and that's exactly what happens here. And what makes this case different is how long that mistake held, because for more than 2 decades, no one came forward to correct it, not in any meaningful way, not enough to change the direction of the case.
Which means people knew more than they were saying?
They did a lot more, and we'll get there. But before we can understand what happened to Janet Chandler, we have to understand where she was, because this wasn't just a motel. It was a very specific kind of environment with a very specific group of people inside it. And once you see how that environment actually functioned, a lot of what happens next starts to make a hell of a lot more sense.
So this isn't just about that night, but it's about everything leading up to it.
Right, because by the time that phone rang, this was not random. So we need to learn a little bit about Janet Chandler, obviously. So Janet Chandler was a 22-year-old senior at Hope College, and she was majoring in music. She wanted to be an opera singer. She had an incredible voice. So in January of 79, she was just weeks away from finishing school with her bachelor's degree. She's definitely not a drifter. She's not somebody that's that's unstable, living off the grid. She's in a very structured life and moving forward. And Janet grew up in a very structured and very religious household.
Okay.
Like, she wasn't allowed to spend the night with friends if the parents had alcohol in the house, not if the parents were going to be drinking. Essentially, if the parents drank alcohol ever, then that was not the kind of people that they wanted her hanging out with.
Gotcha.
And this is not at all going to be an attack on her religious parents. That's
No.
not what I'm trying to frame it, but I'm trying to frame it as there's your typical very religious Christian people. And then there's like the next level of that.
Yeah.
And these people were the next level of that.
Yeah. We never shame. We just explain. So
well,
that's what you're
I'll
doing.
shame where it's appropriate.
Well, that's what I'm saying. You don't shame the wrong people.
Right. But I think that it's important, and we'll get to the reason why I think it's important. The whole point is, you know, she grew up in a very, very sheltered Christian religious family.
Okay.
And music for her was not like a casual thing. It literally was her life. And she would go on to write that God wanted her to get her bachelor's in music and then move on and get her master's in music.
Okay.
And I mean, so
she felt it was a calling, not just
100%.
Okay.
She felt that that is what God had planned for her.
All right.
I think it's important to note that she originally went to college to be a nurse, but the nursing crowd was too wild for her.
Oh, I can see that.
They were partying and doing the typical college student thing.
Yeah.
And she wanted no part of that at that time. And that's when she changed schools and her major to music.
Okay.
And she was, you know, she sang in church and stuff like that. She had a beautiful voice. And she was described by anybody that knew her as responsible, conscientious, committed to school and to work, and no real reckless behavior pattern at all, like through high school and the early parts of college and all that kind of stuff.
So you're saying she's the kind of person who has a routine and sticks to it.
Right. And that's important here because in cases like this, the first question is always, you know, did she just walk away? And in this case, that definitely does not fit. There's no pattern of disappearing. There's no pattern of breaking routine or impulsive behavior. It's a stable baseline. Now, I will say that Janet is going to start at this period of her life kind of experimenting like a lot of kids do at this age. I'd say the vast majority of kids. In my personal experience, I have seen it go a little bit farther with kids that are raised in a very structured religious household as opposed to those that maybe experiment a little bit more through high school. But that's neither here nor there. But the fact that she is beginning to experiment, especially within her own sexuality at this period of her life, is going to be important in the case. Otherwise, I wouldn't even bring it up. Okay. But it's going to be important. During this period, she would go to school through the day at Hope College, and then she needed a job because she had moved out of her parents' house. She was living independently at this time. So she had responsibilities that she had to meet. She had bills she had to pay, that kind of thing. So she needed a job that would work with her course schedule.
Right.
And so she took a job working overnight shifts at a motel in town called the Blue Mill Inn, working the front desk. Her parents didn't like it at all. And I really can't blame them at all because, you know, their concern is obvious. She's working in a motel late at night. She's essentially the only one there at night, you know, as far as, you know, staff goes. We all know how overnights at motels are.
Yeah, it doesn't really matter where you are. It's kind of shady.
It's kind of shady. We're going to find out that this particular time period at this particular motel is a little bit, not a little, is like worlds different from a normal motel environment.
Okay.
But that's really neither here nor there for this part of the conversation, because if it was my daughter working overnights as a front, you know,
night auditor.
Yeah, whatever you call them, then I'm going to be, I'm going to feel the same way. If my son would have come to me at a young age and been like, I want to work overnight at a gas station, I'd be like, really, you can't find a better, you know what I mean? Because of course you worry as a parent.
It's not safe.
Right.
The safety is the first thing that comes to mind.
Exactly. But she worked the overnight shifts there. It's a repeating cycle. And it's not casual. Like I said, she has a full course load at school. She has a night job. She's running on limited sleep. So this is a really high responsibility load on anybody, but especially on a 22-year-old.
Right. And she's not doing that unless she absolutely has to.
Right.
Okay.
This is a very practical decision. She has her tuition she has to pay. And this is 1979. Student loans did exist, and the financial aid and stuff did exist in 1979. It wasn't that long ago. That shit kind of started in the 60s. So it was there, but it was still a totally different environment than what we are in today. And so she had her tuition she had to pay. Like I said, she was living on her own. Well, she had a roommate, but she wasn't living at home with her parents. So she had her bills or responsibilities and stuff. And she essentially had to have a job at night because she was going to school through the day. So, it's a working student that's trying to make it all work. This will become very important in later episodes, but she got that job through her roommate, best friend, and now going to be boss, Lori Swank, who was, like I said, who was her best friend. They lived together, and she was the on-site manager of the Blue Mill Inn. And so she got Janet the job there.
Weird question. Did she college too, or was that just the only thing she did was the on-site manager at the hotel? Lori.
She was not in college.
Oh, tested.
I have plenty to say about her.
Okay.
But I'm not.
But that's not a question you expected?
Well, I would answer that in a different way if we were at a different part in the story.
Okay.
But for right now, I will just say that
she was not in college.
She was not in college. She was working, and that was pretty much it.
Okay.
But I think it's important that her friend and roommate got her the job because it wasn't just random employment. It kind of felt familiar to it, and it probably gave her a little bit more of a sense of control of the environment than she would have going to work for a total stranger. Going to work for her best friend is different.
She was just pounding the pavement, finding something. It just kind of fell in her lap.
Exactly. Yep.
So from her perspective, that was a safe setup.
Exactly. It's a known person, a known place, predictable routine. So no obvious signals that would indicate anything threatening or dangerous or anything other than working overnight at a motel. So her and Lori, like I said, they were roommates. They shared a duplex together, which was close to the motel. It was independent, but it wasn't like isolated. It wasn't, out in the boonies somewhere or something, and not far, far away from her family.
Okay.
But it was a very typical early 20s bachelorette type of situation. And her life in general was go to school, go to work, share housing. Nothing about that at all is abnormal.
She ever sleep? I'm wondering.
Not much.
It didn't sound like it.
Not much. So, her parents stayed in contact with her. They were supportive of her path, obviously, but like I mentioned before, their concern was not Janet. It was the environment that she was in. And especially as the motel atmosphere shifts, which we'll get into that, but the atmosphere at the motel is really going to go through a major transition, or I don't know how to explain it, very soon after Janet started working there. And so we'll break all of that down next.
Okay. So it's not that she made a bad decision per se. It's that the situation around her just changed.
That's exactly it. Janet definitely didn't step into danger knowingly, but she did step into something that became dangerous gradually and quietly and without any clear warning signal. And I do think that her sheltered upbringing possibly made her a little more susceptible to it. And all of this will make sense as we kind of work through this. But at this point in the case, we just need to understand that she's going to school, she's working, she's following a routine. She's doing exactly what she's supposed to be doing. There's really nothing unusual right now, nothing out of place, at least on the surface.
And she's a good kid and
she's
has good intentions.
Kid, yep. Yeah. And so, but because the place she was working wasn't just a motel, especially at this period of time.
Oh, no.
So on paper, the Blue Mill Inn is a roadside motel on US 31 in Holland, Michigan. Relatively small town. It is a 2-story motel, and it's one of those that's 2 stories. And I think this is, and maybe you can answer this, but I think this is what makes it a motel and not a hotel, is all the doors open to the outside.
Exterior corridors.
Yes.
Yeah.
Right. Is that the difference?
So
some shit like
I'm
that.
not 100%, but yeah.
I think it's some shit like that. I've heard.
Because you motor up to it.
Is that like a motor inn?
Yeah. But motel is you can park up against the door.
Okay.
Hotel is that you have to haul things. I think that's how I've been in this industry 20 years. I'm not sure.
I don't know. I've come across this before. I've looked it up before. I'm pretty sure that that's correct.
Yeah.
But it doesn't matter.
It's something about motoring up to it, the exterior corridors.
Well, that makes sense. Like I said, this one is a little bit unique because it's a 2-story motel. Mm-hmm. So, but you have a hallway, except it's a deck.
Yeah, it's
all
outside.
Around the outside on the second floor, right? A lot of apartment buildings kind of fit this model.
Yeah.
Not as many motels fit this model, but this one does. So it's got all exterior doors to the rooms. It has a small front desk, and it looks like every other highway motel.
Like the Bates Motel.
Right.
That one actually looked creepy.
That one definitely looked creepy, and it's a lot smaller than this one.
Yeah. But nothing about this one stands out. It's just a normal place to stop.
Yeah, on the surface, but that is not how it's functioning. Not in 1979.
Okay.
Because in 1979, we don't have any short-term guests here. There's not a constant turnover. Instead, the motel is pretty much exclusively occupied by long-term occupants, all the same people that are there for weeks, months. And that is because the hotel has been literally taken over by Wackenhut security guards. And yeah, it's a terrible name. It's a dude's last name.
Okay.
But it draws all kinds of...
I'm sure my face was like, explain.
Yeah.
Okay.
So it's the guy's last name. Wackenhut Security was a security firm in the 70s. And the group had been brought in because there was a strike going on at a business in town called Chemetron.
Okay.
It was a paint manufacturer. And the workers at the plant went on strike. Typically, we don't have a lot of strike situations in Wyoming. And a lot of the western states are pretty much union free or nearly union free. Most are right to work states. So if you're not from an area where union is big, then it's hard to grasp.
I don't remember how old I was before I understood what union work was.
Well, I remember the first time I encountered strikes was when I was in the Ohio Valley and the workers at Kroger grocery stores went on strike. And even as customers going in there, we were called names because we would dare go to work. But scabs, or the people that work during the strike, there's a threat on their life and safety.
Yeah.
And so...
Well, because they're stopping the people from getting what they want.
Right. And so bringing in security to ensure their safety and security is relatively common during a large scale strike like this. That's what Wackenhut was doing there. But they filled like 80 of the rooms. And I think that there was like 80 rooms. I mean, they pretty much filled the entire motel. And they were living there full time for an extended period.
So it's sounding like it's really not a motel anymore, but it's basically a small apartment complex-ish.
It's essentially exactly what it's become.
Okay.
Now, I don't think that there was cooking facilities inside the rooms. I think it was just standard motel rooms. but they would be eating at local restaurants and stuff like that. And there was a local watering hole bar not far from here that they pretty much moved into and took over the bar as well. And so it's not a motel anymore. It's really a base of operations for Wackenhut security, their living environment, and a totally closed system. And so within that closed ecosystem, you've got the same people walking the same hallways, staying in the same rooms. Like I said, pretty much every single room in this hotel, there's no rotation. There's no turnover of these rooms. There's no anonymity. Everybody knows each other, or they at least think they know each other. And so we have this social structure that's kind of being created in this environment where we have three groups that are interacting with each other constantly. You've got the motel staff who are, and this can probably be said for about any motel, but especially this motel at this time, is your staff is usually relatively young, early 20s, working and socializing kind of in the same space. And then you've got the guards, the Wackenhut security guards, who it's a terrible name. Yeah,
I'm sorry. It just keeps hitting me wrong.
But you've got these guards that come in from out of town. They're transient. They have absolutely no ties to this community whatsoever. And then the third part is the locals. And there were locals that were coming in. The place was like a party, I would say a party house, but it's like a party complex because these guards were party animals. So they'd be having parties that would take up multiple rooms that would migrate between multiple rooms in the motel on regular basis. So locals are coming into these parties and it's a shitstorm is what it is.
Wonderful. So there's no real separation between work and their personal life?
None.
Okay.
So any boundaries are gone. The workplace becomes a social space, a living space, a relationship space, all of those spaces overlapping with each other. And then there's the after hours culture where, nighttime changes everything. The guards are coming off of shift. They're drinking, they're partying. They're, like I said, they're gathering in their rooms. Parties are moving between room and room. I mean, you can visualize exactly how this is.
Yeah.
It's loud, it's open, it's visible. It's basically a good damn thing that they did buy out the whole motel because nobody's going to stay at this place with this shit going on. And if they are, they're getting their rooms comped because nobody's getting any sleep in this place.
Right.
And the staff of the motel become involved socially with the Wackenhut guards. And then you've got young, attractive girls working at the hotel. So obviously relationships begin forming between the staff and the guards and the locals. It's a casual environment. It's overlapping and it's known by everybody.
So this isn't just people working together. They're all just a conglomerate in each other's business.
Exactly.
Oh, wonderful.
Yep. Everybody knows who's with who's sleeping with who's dating who's fighting with who's hooking up, everybody knows everybody's business.
Sounds like a daytime television show.
It sounds like a high school.
It really does.
Yeah. And it is, except way more dangerous. So obviously that whole dynamic creates and feeds and festers jealousy and tension and conflict and all kinds of negative shit, right? This isn't just speculation. It is how the environment functioned. And there are consistent accounts of the Blue Mill Inn during this period of time where there was heavy drinking, very open sexual relationships and stuff like that, minimal to no enforcement of any kind of boundaries. So if you step back and you look at the physical setup of this motel, you've got the front desk, which is small, it's isolated. One person's working there, especially overnight. Often that was Janet, overnight, alone, exposed.
So someone walks in, she's all by herself.
100%. No buffer, no backup, no security. Yeah, the place is full of Wackenhut
Right?
security guards, but there's no independent security.
On her side.
Right.
Correct. Okay.
You've got the exterior doors, the parking lot access, multiple entry points, movements easy in and out. This is 1979. So this is well before key cards and locking the exterior doors, so
there's no way to stop anyone.
No, motels, especially in 1979. I mean, shit, motels in the 80s when I was growing up, if you went to a motel at 3:00 in the morning, you could walk to any door and just walk in the I guess I'm talking about a hotel.
In the common areas.
But you could walk into the hallways and walk around all you wanted to. It's actually very recently that this thing of key cards and then locking the exterior doors has really come about. I think
those doors will automatically lock at a certain time of day.
Yeah. And I think that the invention of key card access is really what allowed that to happen. It's pretty much impossible that they could have done it with keys.
No.
Yeah. I mean, you could have had, you could have had them keyed that way somehow, I think, but people stole keys all the time. With a key card, you can just deactivate it and make a new one. But with keys, it's just if it wasn't impossible, it was so impractical. It was,
you'd be like handing them a janitor set of keys to everybody that you checked in.
It's just totally impractical. So this is not a blow against the Blue Mill Inn at all. It was the reality of 1979.
Yeah.
One thing that I do kind of blame the motel on, frankly, is there was no supervision overnight.
Now, where's ownership?
I couldn't find shit about ownership.
Okay.
I don't know if they were like absentee.
But just cashing checks and they don't care what's going on.
Pretty much.
Okay.
Yeah. Like I said, there's no real supervision. And the quote unquote security that are filling the building are the same people that are living there, partying there, having sex there, doing everything there that they're doing. And I'll be frank, I didn't see any mention of this anywhere, but I find it extraordinarily hard to believe there wasn't a very active a lot of drug activity going on here as well. This is 1979.
Yeah.
This is before you're really doing drug tests for security jobs, and cocaine was everywhere in 79. I just find it hard to believe that wasn't rampant as there as well.
And they would have to do something to stay awake so constantly. I mean, to do their jobs and party, they're doing something.
They're doing something. Exactly right.
So what you're saying, though, is that the people who are supposed to be the safest in the situation are actually part of the environment.
Exactly. There's no neutral authority at all.
That's why I asked where the owners are. Come on, owners.
And we will be discussing Wackenhut management shortly as well. But
they're owners, but the hotel owners too. I'm like, where
I know,
are the people?
I know, but I was just saying that there's two businesses here.
Yeah.
Neither of which is providing any oversight into this situation. And so
wonderful.
Janet obviously is interacting with these men on a constant daily basis, or, whatever her work schedule was like.
Mm-hmm.
And eventually it would come to where it was pretty much daily because she would be there partying on her off days, right?
Yeah.
So she was working the front desk where the keys were, where she was taking messages for the guards. This is obviously before cell phones. So that is how things used to operate, is people would call a motel and leave a message for a guest that was staying there. She was having regular conversations with the guards, daily and almost constant contact. So, this familiarity between everybody is building as this is going on. And that's important because familiar people don't trigger alarm.
Right. So if someone asked her to step away from the desk, it doesn't feel like a threat.
Right. Nothing about it feels urgent. Nothing about it feels dangerous, at least not on the surface. So you've got an exposed front desk inside a closed environment that is full of long-term occupants with severely blurred boundaries,
Right.
pretty much zero oversight. So that's not random risk. It's really a structural risk. And once that kind of environment is in place, it just doesn't take much for something to go wrong. Before we keep going, I want to take a quick second. If you've been listening to Dark Dialogue, you already know that this isn't just storytelling. Every episode is built around one goal, keeping the focus on the victim and working towards the truth. So if that matters to you, make sure that you're following the show on whatever platform you're listening on. And if you haven't yet, take a second to leave a rating or a review. It makes a bigger difference than people realize. And it's what helps these cases reach people who otherwise wouldn't even hear them. All right, so let's get back to the story. Like I talked about a little bit before, in late 1978 is when the Chemetron plant workers went on strike, and it was a typical union situation where there was a contract dispute, tensions were high, and operations at the plant were being disrupted.
So this was already a tense situation before anyone showed up.
Right, strikes always are. And instead of slowing things down, Chemetron decides to escalate it and bring in the replacement workers and the private security. Now, I'm not taking a stand one way or another on whether that was right or wrong,
Right.
but it does escalate the situation. And so the company that they decided to bring in, like I said, was Wackenhut. Now, this is not a local, small-scale security firm. This is a large private security force brought in to secure the plant. They would escort the replacement workers to their vehicles and from their vehicles to work. They control access to the plant, and they were supposed to be professional security experts, but they were 1979 security experts, which makes me think more of like Rocky One than it does, like a security firm today.
Yo, Adrian. So now you've got outsiders coming into a situation where locals are already pretty pissed off about it.
Yes.
Okay.
And that's important because now you have locals who are on strike, the outsiders that are enforcing the control. And so you have immediate friction inside this community from day one. Like I said, it was like 80 guards that were brought in from all across the country.
Whew.
And so they're not local, and they have no ties whatsoever to this community, and they have no long-term stakes here at all.
So there's a real consequence for how they act, or there's no real consequence actually for how they act because they're just not staying.
Right.
Drifting through.
And they know that they're not going to be there long. Strikes don't go on for years and years. They can't. So everybody knows this is a short-term situation. They have no reputation that they need to maintain. They have no community ties. And I know I do this every single time, but the fact of the matter is this is 1979. So a lot has changed. So if you did something bad in Michigan and then you went home to Colorado or California or Florida, that shit didn't follow you
really
then
follow
like
you,
it did, like it does now. Obviously, you bring 80 plus people into town. They're going to need places to live. And the Blue Mill Inn becomes that base of operations. All pretty much the entire staff outside of management, quote unquote, was living at this motel. So they're not spread out. They're stacked together, all in the same place. They work together. They live together. So the Blue Mill Inn really becomes more like a man camp on an oil field or something like that than any kind of a motel.
Right. No one's acting as individuals. They're just a giant group of,
Right. Yep.
Okay.
Yeah. You've got, people working together, living together, decompressing together, partying together,
Yeah.
same voices, same perspectives. And they start kind of acting as one organism.
Gonna get messy.
Yeah. And then when you add the fact that they're working 12-hour shifts and they have all kinds of confrontation that they're dealing with at the plant, on the picket lines, hostility with the locals. It really builds this us versus them mentality, the guards versus the strikers and the outsiders versus the locals. So they're all this whole community is living in this environment of constant tension.
Right. Which you can't imagine that all 80 get along with each other either.
Right.
So they're basically operating in conflict mode with the town, possibly with each other. And then they just bring all that back to the hotel.
Right.
Wonderful. Yes, that sounds great.
And so it really does create a pretty unique environment where you have people that are working together all day, but then they don't decompress by themselves like most every working person does.
Right.
You work with your coworkers through the day, but then you go home and you leave all the work shit at work, hopefully, or
at least 90% of it.
Yeah, and you decompress at home, whether you have a drink or you take a hot bath or have a cup of cocoa or whatever your thing is. You decompress on your own.
I love how innocently you said cocoa.
Well, cocoa is pretty innocent.
I know, but it was just okay anyway.
And because of all the hostility there, they don't integrate into the town. They don't spread out. They all stay in the same damn place. And it creates this strong in-group bonding, this kind of shared mindset.
I thought you were going to say inbreeding because it's kind of feeling that way too.
It's pretty freaking incestuous. But it does generate this shared group think where you've got, shared grievances. Something pisses this person off, then pretty soon everybody's pissed off. Stories get reinforced, attitudes escalate, and there's no outside correction. And I keep coming back to that because it's really important is there's no adult in the room that comes in and says, knock this shit off, act like grown adults or I'm going to shit can you.
I will turn this hotel around and we'll go home.
Doesn't happen.
Okay.
And when a group like that forms, then behavior starts normalizing internally. Even if it wouldn't outside of that group, if that makes sense.
So what is normal to them might not be normal anywhere else.
Yeah, right. And that gap is really important. Now, at the plant, they control access, they enforce movement, they represent the authority at the plant. That doesn't just shut off when they go back to the motel.
Right. They still see themselves as the ones in control, even off the clock.
Right. There's this machismo atmosphere definitely building here. The authority carries over. I think that they were a bunch of arrogant pricks to begin with.
Yeah.
And this doesn't help the situation.
No, it sounds like lighter fluid.
It does. And, I'm probably going to come back to this multiple times, but 1979 security firms is not 2026 security firms.
Yeah.
Now, we have some very professional security firms. A lot of them are ex-military. They operate in stressful environments. They've been trained to operate in stressful environments. They're brought in because they have expertise in areas, site security, cybersecurity, whatever. In 1979, when I said it reminds me of Rocky 1, it really does because it was very much more you're big enough to intimidate people and maybe break somebody's legs if you need to. Yeah. You're hired.
Yeah.
Way more than it was.
You want to throw people around? Good. Be here at 8.
Exactly. Yeah. It was essentially like hiring a whole bunch of bouncers.
Yeah.
Instead of looking for security professionals. And that's a big distinction.
Yeah.
So if we step back and we look at what we've got going on here, we've got a large group of type A transient men, type A personalities. They have no ties to the community. They're operating under conflict conditions. They're living in the same spaces. They're reinforcing each other's behavior. They're carrying authority into that place. And I also think that it's important to reinforce, even though I said it before, is 1979 is not the time for background checks. So you could very well, and I have nothing to back this up, but you could very well and most likely had a large criminal element present within this group as well.
Right.
And so
I hate to say it, but sometimes that element was what security companies looked for, because they would act however they felt like they had to act to keep the security.
100%. I mean, during the late 60s and into the 70s, by 79, this had kind of stopped. But in the late 60s and into the 70s, the Hells Angels provided security for all kinds of concerts and gatherings and shit like that. 1% motorcycle clubs like the Hells Angels provided security. That's what security was, it was people everybody else was afraid of.
Exactly.
That's how they kept people in line. And so I have every reason to believe that Wackenhut was no different. They were going to be employing people that were intimidating and would scare people into towing the line.
Right.
They're not bringing in Poindexter in his, pants that are too short, pulled up to his nipples, and his geeky little glasses on, and Merkel or Werkel, or who was that guy?
Urkel?
That guy. Yeah. That one.
You just added too many letters. You're good.
I was close.
You were very close, yes.
He's not the guy they're going to bring in for security.
No.
And so when you combine that entire mess with everything that we've laid out about this structure at the motel, the environment really starts to change, and not suddenly and not obviously, but steadily. And I think it's important to note that during this period of time, Janet's dad stopped at the hotel. I think it might have been her parents, but her dad was the one that would later speak about it. And he saw the lobby full of these guards and stuff. And he always regretted not just putting his foot down and saying, "You are done here. We're leaving. Get in the car."
Right.
Because he could see this is not a good environment.
Right. This is where things start to shift, even if no one realizes it yet.
Right. Because at this point, nothing has happened as far as there's been no crimes reported, no incidents, but the conditions are present there. And once those conditions are in place, it really doesn't take much for something to trigger them. So when we look back at this case now, it's really easy to ask, how did nobody see this coming? But that's not really how it works in real time. Mm-hmm. There really wasn't one moment that was like a clear warning or an obvious red flag. It was gradual. It was a shift in the culture, and things didn't feel dangerous. They just started to feel different.
So it's not one big warning. It's just a bunch of smaller things that don't seem serious on their own.
That's exactly right. And that's what makes it hard to recognize.
Right.
First you've got the guards and the staff that are seeing each other constantly, every day, every night. And that creates a familiarity among them. They're going to be having conversations with each other. They're going to be joking with each other. And anytime that you put men and women in a situation like that, you're going to have flirting that's going to go on. And then over time, guest and employee really stops meaning anything at all.
Right.
They're no longer strangers and customers. They're part of the same social circle.
Yeah, the distance that's supposed to be there, it just disappears. Exactly.
I mean, I think the best example of this that I could give is a college dorm.
Mm-hmm.
It doesn't take very long after college starts for the semester. Everybody moves in and all that. Originally, for the first short period of time, you have a whole bunch of strangers all living in separate rooms. But in a very short period of time, you have an entire social network where everybody knows everybody. Mm-hmm. Friend groups are created. People are starting to hang out together. And it's a totally different environment. And you compare that to a normal motel, hotel, short-term stay situation, that never happens. Mm-hmm. I mean, you might meet somebody at the hotel bar and have a conversation or something. And if you're there for a week, maybe you run into each other 2 or 3 times, but then you're gone. You never see that person again. Yeah. But that's not the situation when everybody's living there. So it's totally different. And then when you add drinking, and When I say drinking, I don't mean occasionally going to the bar. I mean getting shit-faced every night kind of drinking. I suspect drug use, after hours interaction, and then obviously relationships are going to start to form. Mm-hmm. The staff and the guards, the hotel staff, motel staff, and the guards are spending time together. They're hooking up. They're arguing. They're reconnecting. They're basically forming this mini society. And there's going to be personal issues that are going to start bleeding into the work environment.
Yeah, it's not just coworkers now. It's relationships, jealousy, all mixed together.
Right. And then you start to introduce gossiping, conflict, resentment growing. Because when I said it was very much like a high school, it was a lot like a high school with like 5 girls attending the entire high school, if that makes sense, right? In a high school, at least you have a relatively even distribution between girls and boys. Mm-hmm. In this environment, you had like 80 dudes and 5 or 6 women, you know? And if you pull from the community, maybe a few more women in and out. But as far as within this ecosystem, it was a small group of women and a large group of men. And the important part about that whole dynamic is everybody knows everybody else's business. Mm-hmm. And then this is where it shifts. What normally would stand out starts to feel normal. Loud arguments, public confrontations, sexual behavior that's crossing into workspaces, all of that becomes part of the normal environment.
Right. So things that should feel off just become, it's routine. It's what happens.
Exactly. Yeah. And once something starts to feel normal, people stop questioning it, you know? And then if you start to layer in jealousy, competition, frustration, specifically around sexual or romantic relationships.
The 5 girls to 80 guys. Yeah.
Right. Who's getting the attention? Who's, sliding who? When I said it was an incestuous mess, it's an incestuous mess. You have arguments, complaints, people talking about it, people gossiping. It's a shitstorm is basically what we've got brewing here.
And people were aware that something was off. They just didn't see it as dangerous.
Exactly. It registers as drama, not real risk. And again, not to keep repeating myself, but the time does factor into this because in 79, a lot of shit and I'm not saying that this necessarily was going on here, but I do think it helps to set the scene that in 1979, a douchebag raping a woman was like, boys will be boys. Mm-hmm. It was that kind of mentality. Rapes were often not reported. Rapes were often not prosecuted if they were reported. This is not the time that women were treated with great value when it came to that dynamic between men and women. It's just a mess is what it is. This, though, is where it really starts to matter more because there's references that are going to be coming up as we work through this arc where people are going to be talking about teaching people a lesson, dealing with issues like this, confronting this gossipy bullshit that's going on in a physical way. We're not hearing this through hindsight. What we're going to find out is this comes out through testimony. In this particular moment at the Blue Mill Inn, comments like, we're going to teach her a lesson or whatever, can sound like a crude joke or venting or frustration, not necessarily like a plan.
All right. But hearing it now, it's not normal at all.
No, not in hindsight for sure. Mm-mm. But in that environment, it didn't immediately trigger alarm. And I also think that the group that was there is a big part of the reason, because you're going to find out that there's large portions of this group that are absolute shitbags that I got nothing good to say about this whole group of bastards, but men and women. Some people would later describe that during this period, something felt off. They couldn't really point to anything specific, nothing clear, definitely nothing that was actionable at all, but just a weird kind of tension or feeling, or I think we all know what that means. Something's not right here. I can't put my finger on it, but something's not right. But nobody sees the full picture. Everybody is just seeing pieces, interactions, one moment, but not all the moments. There's not a clear pattern, at least at this period of time.
So no one connects it because no one has all of it mixed together.
Right.
They all have pieces.
And without that, there's no intervention. So what you actually have is this increasing familiarity between all of the people involved. You know, like I said, the Wackenhut guards were brought in from all over the country. So there's no real reason to believe that they all knew each other. I'm sure a lot of them come in and were complete strangers to the other groups. I mean, that is how these operations work. You might end up on the same crew with the same guys from time to time, but it's not like the same 80 guys went from Holland, Michigan, and their next place was going to all be in Ohio or someplace. You know, I mean, they're all going to go home, and then they're going to get called, and some of them are going to go to Washington, some of them to Florida, you know, so a lot of these guys are strangers too. So you're building that familiarity within this entire ecosystem, which then leads to blurred boundaries, normalized behavior that would not normally be normal, rising tensions, concerning language, and all of it's happening at the same time, but inside this closed ecosystem. And none of it feels like any kind of a clear warning. It just feels like things are maybe getting a little out of control here. And then something happens that takes all of that and it turns it into something very real. If we bring this down to one person, the person this story is about is Janet. She's working the night shift, late evening into early mornings, and then that's when everything changes. Her daytime is very structured. She's going to school, supervised, it's predictable. And then nights are quiet. Well, I don't know about quieter, but different. There's less oversight, and there's the same group of people that are always there are still there.
So this is when the building isn't really operating like a business anymore. Right.
Especially after hours. Now, during this period of time, I don't know that the Blue Mill Inn was really operating like a business at any point, but especially overnight, it's not. All your housekeepers are pretty much gone. You know, I mean,
unless they're there partying with them still,
which is a possibility, but they're off the clock. My point is, I mean, you know, hotels way better than I do, but the overnight shift is the skeleton crew. You usually have like one person working the desk, especially at a smaller 80-room hotel.
Yeah.
One person working the desk.
If you have anybody on property, especially in 79.
Right. Yeah. Or, you know what happened a lot, quite frankly, is somebody lived behind the front desk and you rang a bell and got them out of bed and they come and checked you in if it was 2:00 in the morning. That wasn't the situation here, but you know, just to set the scene in that time a little bit.
It did happen a lot, yeah.
I can't say for sure, but it's very, very likely that the overnight person, predominantly Janet, was the only employee on staff that was there in those overnight hours. Some motels will have...
In a work capacity.
In a work capacity. Some motels will have like a maintenance person on call, but they're usually not there actively doing anything because what the hell can they do when everybody's sleeping?
Yeah.
Right? They're not fixing shit.
Might be bumming around.
Maybe. But I think that's even less likely. In 79, in an 80-room motel, it was probably the housekeepers that probably vacuumed the hallways and cleaned the entire facility as part of their daily cleanup. And so I think it's very likely Janet was it. There's few, if any, travelers, no real new check-ins. So pretty much 100%.
Because where are we going to put them?
Exactly. So pretty much 100% of the interaction between Janet and anybody was with the Wackenhut guards. And then, like you said, any other people that were there partying with them that maybe were motel staff or locals that came in, but we're not dealing with customers. So on paper, she's maybe answering the phone, handling the desk, managing cash, helping guests. But in reality, she's kind of managing the environment, and she's taking requests. There's going to be lots of interruptions, interactions with the Wackenhut guards, and all of that. Anything that happens in that motel is coming to the front desk because she's the only one that you can talk to, right?
Right.
So the front desk really becomes the center of everything. And you've got one person, Janet, alone at that desk. No manager, no staff, no second employee. It's just her.
Right. So when and if something happens, she is the only one there to deal with it.
That's exactly right. She's visible. She's reachable. There's a glass front lobby with the front doors. The parking lot's right outside. Anyone approaching the building can see her. Anyone inside knows exactly where she's at.
Talk about a fishbowl. I hate that feeling.
Yeah, she's not hidden. She's absolutely exposed. Anybody could walk in, approach the desk, start a conversation. There's no barrier. There's no controlled access. And I mean, honestly, unless you're staying in a shithole motel, there's not now. I mean, this is exactly the same way it is in most hotels now as it was then. You'd walk in, and a lot of the times it's a single woman or a single young man that's working the desk by themselves. This is pretty normal still.
Yeah, there's really nothing stopping someone from just walking right up to Janet at this point.
Nothing. If anything escalates, her options are to call a manager or call the police.
And they probably didn't have the under the desk buttons at the time.
I'm sure not.
Especially not this little hotel.
No. There's no one there that could immediately help. There's no physical backup. And that's important because the only quote unquote security in the building, again, are the Wackenhut guards.
So the people closest to her aren't actually there to protect her.
Right.
Which is not funny.
It's true, though.
Yeah.
You've got a whole bunch of quote unquote security guards
who are sick of protecting people all day. Yeah.
18-year-old kids.
Mm-hmm.
And
their protecting time is over at that point.
Right.
Yeah.
There's no neutral position. And most late night interactions, like we talked about, are not coming with strangers. It's guards she already knows, people she sees all the time. So that familiarity really begins to lower your guard. It does for all of us. Janet's not unique in this situation, right? You'd spend day after day after day after day with somebody, you'd kind of start to trust them. I mean, if day one, they don't hurt you, then day two and day three and pretty soon, you start to feel comfortable around them.
So at this point, if someone approaches her, it just doesn't feel unusual.
Right. It feels normal. And that's critical. And so this is where everything kind of comes together because she's visible, she's reachable, she's expected to engage. She has keys, she has information, she is in control of the desk. But she is not in control of who's in the building, how they behave, and what happens off the desk. So she looks like she might be in control, but she's definitely not.
Yeah, she's stuck with all the responsibility and none of the power.
Right. Responsibility with no authority.
True.
So it's late at night, partying building,
Jeez.
the same group of people running all over the place, and one person at the front desk is handling everything. And in that position, it just doesn't take much for something to go from normal to something else entirely. I do think that it is important to note here, and this obviously is not to denigrate Janet or anything like that, but it is the reality. And that is that I mentioned earlier that she's kind of starting to explore her sexuality a little bit. And she had been brought up in this strict Christian household. And we know that during this period of time, she was having sexual relationships, surprise, surprise, with several of the men that are there providing quote unquote security.
Right.
And I say that in that way because, Janet is a 22-year-old kid and most of these guys are in like their 40s. Right. And so she's completely
oblivious to.
Yeah. I mean, she's completely outwitted by the people that are basically competing for her attention. She's First of all, she lived a very sheltered life. And again, I'm not saying that's good or bad, but I am saying that it does factor in here because she didn't learn early in life how to deal with some situations.
Street smarts per se.
Right. And so she's thrust into this environment, and I'm sure a 22-year-old girl that had been to college and stuff like that, she's probably sexually curious. And then she starts to get these guys romanticizing sexual experiences, and who the hell knows, promising to love her forever. And who knows what the hell all she was told, but it's not surprising that you have 80 some single men. And when I say single men, I don't mean that none of these men had wives at home.
They're single because they're there. Yeah.
I mean, right. None of them had wives there because many of them were married. But, you know, when you have 80 some unattached, whatever, however you want to say it, men and 5 or 6 women, you know what's going to happen in a situation like that. It's almost inevitable. Especially when there's absolutely zero oversight. Now, if you have 2 companies that are like, okay, we'll do this, but there's going to be some damn strict rules. Wackenhut, you got to keep your men in line. We're going to keep our staff in line. This is how this is going to be operating because we can see the potential for a big shitstorm here.
Yeah.
That didn't happen in this case. So you have completely unsupervised environments where pretty much anything goes. And so that brings this to the night itself. Late January 1979 at the Blue Mill Inn. On the surface, there's nothing unusual. It's a cold winter night in Michigan. Quiet town. The motel's operating in the same, I don't know, whacked out, jacked up shitstorm that it's been operating in. But everything's the same as it has been for months.
Basically, to her, it looks like every other night she's worked.
Right. And that's important. So we've got the parking lot outside. It's going to be full of cars, all the guard vehicles. It's cold. It's quiet. And then inside, you have a lit lobby, mostly still. The building is occupied. I'm sure there's some partying and the same shit going on that's going on every night. But really, everything feels settled. Janet's at the desk going through whatever her normal routine was, answering calls, logging information, watching the clock, waiting for her shift to get over. Nothing out of pattern.
She's just moving through her shift like she's just done before, time and time again. Right.
This is routine. The building moves between, 2 states. The doors open and closing, occasional phone calls, someone's passing through, and that's the routine state. And then you have disruption, voices in the hallway, movement between rooms, guards coming and going, partying going on. Who the hell knows what's going on, especially in 1979? Because let's be honest, late 70s into the 80s was a wild time for pretty much everybody.
Yeah,
so
it brought both of us into the world.
Right. But nothing, not the routine or the disruptive atmosphere really stands out at all because it's all normal.
Right. So nothing here would make her think anything is wrong.
Right. Everything fits the same pattern that she's used to. And then, as the night gets later, there's going to be fewer people moving, fewer outside interruptions. I do think that it's important to note that I've kind of made it sound like there's 80 wild, crazy, freaking lunatics occupying this building.
80 monkeys.
And I don't think that that's realistic. I can't say exactly what the environment is, but I can say I've never been in a group of 80 people where everybody is the same, ever.
Yeah.
You always have your wild, crazy group. You always have your more subdued group that maybe parties from time to time. And then you have your very secluded, I don't want no part of your bullshit. I have a wife at home that I love. I'm not interested in your shit. I go to work, I do my job, I come back, I read the Bible, I watch TV, I do whatever I do, but I don't interact with you lunatics because I don't agree with what you do. Yeah. And I have to believe that there was that element in this as well.
There always is, yeah.
As we get to the inevitable conclusion of all of this, we're not going to be talking about 80 people.
Correct.
So I have no reason to, I just think it's important to note that, because if there's any Wackenhut guards out there that were at the Blue Mill Inn in 1979 and they're like, hey,
I
man,
wasn't part of this.
I was not part of this. They're probably right, because there is
and
there's
we'd
never,
like to speak with you if you want to talk to us.
Yeah, absolutely. But there's never a group like that everybody's involved in the shit that goes down. So
correct. Unless it's a group of like 5.
Right. Or it's like the Gambino family or something like that. But, as the night gets later, we have fewer people moving around. There's going to be fewer interruptions. The world kind of shrinks a little bit. It becomes the building and the people that are already inside it. There's really not new variables once you pass a certain point in night, right?
Yeah, we all know how that feels. So anyone she's dealing with at this point, she already knows.
Right. No strangers, only familiar faces. And this is where it matters, because what we're going to know later is kind of what I've alluded to already, that the relationships in this building are already extremely complicated.
Yeah.
And there's that familiarity that we talked about. There's that tension we talked about. There's that underlying conflict that we talked about. We're not seeing any visible event yet, but we are definitely seeing the conditions.
So something could be building. It just wouldn't look any different from the outside.
Right. And that's really the problem. So you've got the late night, quiet lobby, limited movement, one person at the desk handling everything. And somewhere inside that building, something shifts. It's not a loud shift and it's not public, but it is decisive.
So this is the moment where something changes, even if she doesn't realize it yet.
Right. From her perspective, nothing has changed.
Mm-hmm.
From inside that environment, everything is about to. And then someone approaches the desk or the phone rings, and what sounds like another interaction becomes something else entirely. So when you step back and you look at everything that we've laid out, this case doesn't begin with a moment. It begins with a system, a place that looked ordinary from the outside, but functioned very differently on the inside. A group of people brought in under pressure, living together, working together, and slowly reshaping the environment around them. And inside of that environment, you have a young woman doing exactly what she's supposed to be doing, going to school, working her shift, following a routine that on the surface never changes. But underneath that routine, things were shifting. Boundaries were dissolving, tension was building, and behavior that should have stood out stopped standing out at all. And that by the time we reached the early morning hours, there are no alarms going off, no obvious warning signs, nothing that clearly says something is about to happen. And that's what makes this case so difficult to look at, because when everything feels normal, that's often when people are the most exposed. So in the next episode, we're going to move into that moment, the phone call, the scene that the investigators walked into, and the narrative that took hold almost immediately, one that would shape this case for decades. But before we go any further, we're going to take a moment to step away from that environment and focus on the person at the center of it. Because Janet Chandler wasn't a theory. She wasn't a headline. She wasn't a piece of some larger narrative. She was a daughter, a student, a young woman building a life that was just beginning to take shape. And like every story that we tell here, that matters more than anything else. This is You're Not Alone by the J.J. Hawk Band. And this is Janet Chandler. Janet Chandler was 22 years old, a senior at Hope College, a music student who spent years working towards something that required discipline, focus, and consistency day after day, year after year. She was close to finishing school, close to stepping into whatever came next, close to that moment in life where things start to open up. And it's important to stop there for a second, because when we hear a year like 1979, it feels distant. It feels like another time, another world. But Janet wasn't from another time. She was 22 years old, the same as any 22-year-old today, trying to figure things out, balancing school and work, managing responsibility, relationships, expectations, all at the same time. There's nothing outdated about that. There's nothing distant about that. That is real life, and that hasn't changed. She was living independently, going to class during the day, working nights to support herself, doing what she needed to do to move forward. Not because it was easy, but because it was necessary. And the people who knew her, they didn't describe someone reckless or out of control. They described someone steady, someone who showed up, someone who took what she was doing seriously. She had structure in her life. She had direction. She had something that she was building towards. And that matters because it tells you something very simple but very important. Janet Chandler was living her life, not drifting through it, not disconnected from it, living it. She had friendships, relationships, connections to the people around her, a family who stayed in contact with her, who knew where she was, what she was doing, and what she was working toward. She existed in a real, grounded world, not just a name attached to a case, but as a person with a place in other people's lives. And that's the part that often gets lost, because when a case like this unfolds, the focus shifts to the environment, to the investigation, to the people responsible. But before any of that, there was a life that had nothing to do with any of it. A life that was in progress, not finished, not defined by tragedy, just beginning. She was at the point where things were still forming, where plans aren't locked in yet, but the path is there, where the future isn't fully clear, but it's coming into focus. And she was moving toward it, step by step. That future didn't disappear because it didn't exist. It disappeared because it was taken. And that distinction matters, because Janet Chandler is not remembered because of what happened to her. She's remembered because she was here, because she lived a real life with real effort, real direction, and real purpose. And in the episodes ahead, we're going to continue to examine what happened. We're going to break down the decisions, the actions, and the failures that led to her death, but none of that exists without her. Janet Chandler was a daughter, a student, a young woman standing at the edge of her future in exactly the same way a 22-year-old would be today. And she deserved the same chance to live that future. And that's what was taken.
What was heavy now feels free. With every heartbeat, you believe. Lift your eyes, there's a brighter sky. Don't let the voice of doubt tell